Right, so today we're going to talk about end behavior as well as the different types of like zeros and how they're related and how to recognize them just based off of the graph. So the first thing that we have is a cross, okay, and this has a multiplicity of 1, okay, and then we have a bounce, which kind of looks like a quadratic, which is going to have a multiplicity of 2. And then we have a wiggle, which has a multiplicity of 3. Now, I know you're sitting there and you're like, what the heck is multiplicity? So, multiplicity is taking that 0 and multiplying it by itself. So, for instance, if I had something like x times x minus 2 raised to the second power. We notice how this right here would have an exponent of 1, and then this has an exponent of 2. So if I went into my calculator, or if I went into my graphing calculator, and I graphed this, for instance, I had x times x minus 2 squared. All right, and I graphed it. You notice how it crosses once, so it has a exponent of 1. Okay, so it crosses at 0, which would be the solution if we set x equal to 0. And then it has this bounce that happens right at x equals 2. Okay, so that's the reason why there's this squared value right here. Okay, so what we're going to do is each graph will have one or more of these zeros. If it has that 0, does it wiggle, bounce, or cross at that point? Give the exponent of the corresponding factor. So we're going to take each of these, and I would first go ahead and fill in all of this information on the side. So the first thing is the sign of the leading coefficient. Okay, so looking at the front number as well as this number right here, if you multiplied those together, would it be positive or negative? Well, it would be positive. Okay, so sign of the leading coefficient is positive. Okay. Degree is going to be the highest exponent that you would have if you wrote it out in standard form. Remember, standard form is you're going to multiply these all out and have it in descending exponent order. So 2x squared times x to the first is going to give me 2x to the third. Remember, we're going to add those exponents. 2x squared times negative 1 is going to give me negative 2x squared. So what is my highest degree? That's going to be 3. Okay, so this should have 3 solutions, which it does. Okay, so now you're going to figure out whether or not those solutions are the ones to this equation. So I would take each of these, set them equal to 0, and then solve, right? Okay, so if I took 2x squared, I'm just going to do this off to the side, 2x squared, set it equal to 0, and solve, that's going to give me x equals 0. Now the question that we're going to ask is, does it bounce, wiggle, or cross? Well, what was the exponent that it had? It had a squared, which means that it had a multiplicity of 2, which means that it's going to bounce. So where it says x equals 0, we're going to say bounce, if I can spell bounce correctly. Okay, and it's going to have a multiplicity of 2. That writing. All right, so then we're going to take these parentheses and we're going to set them equal to 0. And again, I'm just going to do this off to the side. X minus 1 equal to 0. We're going to add 1 to both sides. And so x is going to equal 1. Okay, now what was the exponent for that one? Well, the exponent isn't there, so that means that we assume that it is a 1. So it has a multiplicity of 1, which means that it's going to be a cross. And for this one, we don't have x equals negative 1. Okay, so now we're going to actually graph this. Now there's 2 different ways you can graph this. You can graph it based off of the bounce and the cross, or you can throw it into your calculator like I'm going to do, just to check your work. Okay, so for instance, I'm going to go into that y equals button, and I'm going to type 2x squared times x minus 1. and then I'm going to hit graph. Okay, so we see it comes up, okay, and it's going to hit 0, and we're going to bounce off, and then it's going to cross at x equals 1. Okay, so it goes up, bounces off, kind of creates that parabola look, and then goes back up and crosses straight through as if it were like a linear function. Now, when we're looking at in behavior, we're looking at the arrows and what they're doing. So the left in behavior is going to be everything from the left of 0. So is it going up or down if you're looking to the left? It's going down. So we're going to say negative infinity. If we're looking to the right, is it going up or down? It's going up. So positive infinity. All right, so now we're going to look at question number 2. Okay, so we're going to try to do this without our graphing calculator this time because on your SAT, you're not going to be able to graph these, and then they're just going to give you this information, and then you're going to have to produce that graph. So, for instance, we're going to take each of these and set them equal to 0 and solve. So, I love that handwriting. So cute. All right, we're going to divide by -6 on both sides. So that means that I'm going to have x equals 0. Okay, so at x equals 0, are we going to have a bounce, a cross, a wiggle, or a bounce? We're going to have a cross because we have a multiplicity of 1 because that exponent is 1, right? So we're going to say we're going to have a cross because multiplicity is 1. Okay? Over here, I know we often forget how to get rid of a cube, but in order to get rid of a cube, we're going to take the cubic root of both sides. And fortunately for us, if you take the cubic root of 0, you still get 0. So then we're going to subtract 1 from both sides, and that's going to give us x equals -1. Okay, so we're not going to have a solution for x equals 1, right? But at x equals -1, is it going to have a cross, wiggle, or a bounce? Well, it's going to be a wiggle because it's going to have a multiplicity of 3. Okay? Now, what is the sign of our leading coefficient? It's negative. Okay? So we got a negative leading coefficient. And what is our degree? Remember, in order to find our degree, and I'm going to erase this. In order to find our degree, what we're going to do is we're going to take our exponents and we're going to multiply them together. So we're going to take this guy and this guy and we're going to add them together. Which is going to give us 4. All right. So we should have something with a 4th degree polynomial. We're going to have something that looks like a W or an upside down W. Okay. With an upside down W, what's going to happen is we're going to have a negative coefficient. So obviously we're going to have something that looks like this, right? But we got to figure out what it looks like with this whole wiggle and cross nonsense, right? Okay, so we know that there's going to be a wiggle at -1. Okay, so there's going to be like some type of wiggle. And a wiggle is you go into the 0 and kind of like come back out, but then like go back down. And I know that sounds really strange. But, I'm sorry. Let me go back. So we're going to start down here. We're going to wiggle. And then we're going to cross 0. So again, rough sketch. Obviously rough sketch. But we're just going to go with it. Okay, so we would have a left in behavior at -infinity. And we'd also have a right in behavior at -infinity. The way I look at in behavior is I imagine myself standing at 0, 0. This is me standing at 0, 0. And I would look to the left and I would say, am I going up or down? Am I look to the right? Am I going up or down? Okay, so whenever you're talking about in behavior, you're starting from 0, 0. You're like that little blue guy. Okay. All right, so I always check my work in the graphing calculator because sometimes I make mistakes. So I come in here and I say, all right, -6x times x plus 1 to the 3rd power. Make sure you use those parentheses, otherwise you're going to get this wrong. Okay, and then I'm going to hit graph. Please be the right thing. Look at it. It's so pretty. Okay, so if I want to kind of like look in a little bit closer, I'm going to hit zoom, and then I'm going to come down to zoom in. And we can kind of get a closer look at what's happening. So this little like wiggle right here, yeah, it goes into the x-intercept and then kind of like comes back out and then crosses. Yeah, it's like a roller coaster. Woo! First roller coaster ever. All right, so take a moment, pause the video, look at this one, try it on your own, and then hit play. All right, so hopefully you practice that a little bit. First thing you're going to do is set all these bad boys equal to 0. Yeah. I got more space. I can write better. All right, you're going to divide by 3 on both sides, and so x is going to equal 0. And then over here, remember, in order to get rid of that cubic, we're going to take the cubic root. So that's going to give us x minus 1 equals 0. Add 1 to both sides. X equals 1. And then over here, take the square root of both sides. So x plus 1 equals 0. And yeah, minus 1 on both sides. So x equals negative 1. So when x equals negative 1, what was the multiplicity on this one? This is going to be a bounce. And it's going to be a multiplicity of 2. And then when x equals 0, it's going to have a cross because multiplicity of 1. And then x equals 1. And that's going to have a multiplicity of 3. And that's going to be a wiggle. One thing I want to mention, if you've got anything that's higher than a degree of 3, so for instance, if this was x minus 1 raised to the 4th power, that would still be a bounce because, sorry, it would still be a bounce because that would repeat that pattern of cross, bounce, wiggle. It's kind of like anything that has a factor of 2 or like is a multiple of 2 is going to be that tendency of that bounce. And we might see that a little bit later. So don't worry about that just yet. All right, so our leading coefficient is going to be positive, and our degree, if we add these all up, is going to be 6, or a degree of 6. And then now we're going to actually draw our graph. Okay, so we're going to have a cross at 0. Okay, and this is a 6-degree polynomial. Okay, so it's going to look like a fat W, roughly. Okay, so, all right, so what's going to happen is we're going to have a multiplicity of 2 at negative 1, so that's going to be a bounce, right? So it's going to be like, yeah, okay? So it's going to come back up. And then we're going to have a cross at 0 with a multiplicity of 1, so it's going to come back down. Okay, and then we're going to wiggle through x equals 1. So wiggle, wiggle. There you go. Worst drawing ever of my life, but that means that my left in behavior, so remember me standing at 0, 0, hi there. So looking to the left, it's going to be positive. Looking to the right, it's going to be positive. And then obviously I want to check it. And that's what the graph would look like. And that's exactly what I drew over there. Very, very close to it. Maybe not the most perfect one ever, but I like to think of myself as Picasso. So you're going to try the next few problems and then check the video in the independent practice down at the bottom. Good luck.